When you are.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the October 22nd, 2020 Watertown Plan Commission meeting. Take a roll call.
Dolly.
Here.
Spire.
Here.
Ford.
Here.
Kays.
Here.
Brink.
Here.
Oletsky.
Present.
Dargis Johnson.
Here.
Culhane is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brandy. Moving on to item 3 on the agenda is invitation for public comment participants submittal. If there's anybody there in the room to speak on an item that's not on the agenda today, we'll have that towards the end of the agenda if you want to sign up now. We'll move up to item 4 on the agenda, which is approval of the agenda. We'll need a motion.
I'll make that motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or changes to the agenda? Okay, we'll take a vote.
Okay, Dolly.
Yes.
Spire.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to item 5 on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the October 8th, 2020 meeting. So everybody had a chance to review those?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the October 8th meeting.
I'll second it.
So a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and take a vote.
Blake,
Oh, yes.
there's a correction. Neither Jeff nor Bill are included on the absent members.
When because they're the alternates, so then I don't include them as absent.
Oh, all right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you though.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional comments before we take the vote?
And actually now, just to clarify too, as of Monday, then Jeff Brink is now a member, and then Jason Hansen has moved to first alternate. So that was ratified at the council meeting.
Yeah, and so that'll be effective this meeting here then.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. All right, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Okay. Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Spire.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes. Those minutes pass. We'll move on to the regular agenda. On to item 6A, which is resolution 2020-49. Brandy?
Thank you, Blake. So this is commission consideration of resolution number 2020-49, amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown for the replat of Lot 4 of DeVille Edition from R1 Single Family Residential District to R3 Multifamily Residential District. So here you can see on the map that this is along South Lake Drive, pretty close to Sandy Shores. And so the current owners, Daniel and Kathy Gabriel, have petitioned to rezone this property from R1 to R3, which is the multifamily residential district. The property is approximately 4,558 square feet in size. And things to kind of note here, I'll turn on the adjacent zoning districts. So there is nearby R3 zoning, and then there are properties within or between the two that are zoned R1. And the thing though is the use doesn't necessarily match the zoning designation of a single family residential district, as I believe there is a duplex. One of these structures is a duplex, and I think the adjacent landowner is here too if he clarifies. And then so the square footage of this lot actually does meet the minimum size requirement for an R3 lot, because you only need 1,300 square feet per dwelling unit. So just depending on what he proposes to do, it is odd in that sense that an R1 lot, an R1 district, a single family residential district lot has to be 9,000 square feet as a minimum. And in the R3, we don't really have a minimum size requirement. It's just the 1,300 square feet per unit, per dwelling unit. So that's where it's a little, a different scenario here. But this lot, as long as he went, I think you could go up to six units and you would still meet the size requirement for the lot. Let me do a quick calculation. So if we went 1,300 times 6, yeah, that puts, okay, hang on. The total lot size is 7,985 square feet when the lot line is extended to the ordinary high water mark on Lake Kempesca. So that's where I'm getting. So if you had 6 units on here, there you would need a minimum of 7,800 square feet, and so this would still meet that. But also to keep in mind that they would still have to meet off-street parking requirements and setbacks. So with that confusion,
Yeah, that is really confusing what you just said. So all the way to the lake,
yeah, so at the lake, a lot,
there's no setbacks from the high water mark or anything?
no,
So
there still would be.
The setback is measured from the high water mark around the lake. That's part of the ordinance.
Yes.
But I'd like a point of clarity on what legally constitutes their owned lot size. Does that include the extension all the way to the high water mark, or is it what's
Yes.
showing on the GIS?
Nope, it is. So I will show, I'll grab this toolbar here so I can draw. And so the properties that are adjacent to the lake, they actually own up until the ordinary high water mark, which I turned on the contours before and I crashed it, but I'm pretty sure that the ordinary high water mark is around this proximity. So technically, they own out until the ordinary high water mark, which is the elevation of 1719.1. So then that gives them additional square footage. Now, they could do a situation like the neighbors and do a seawall where they would reclaim their property. They could build a seawall and bring in fill and be able to utilize the property. I mean, as long as they got their correct permits and they had BMPs in place so that water quality wasn't being compromised.
What's the difference in the way that the GIS treats these lots versus the ones to the east where it actually does appear to extend out to the high water mark?
You know, I'm not sure. I think what this is following is the plats, and a lot of the times the plats never really include the extension of the ordinary high water mark because they can't physically place a pin in the lake.
Yeah.
So I think that's where this is derived from more so, and maybe Todd might have clarity on that with First District does our mapping.
Mr. Chair, these lines were drawn based upon the lines provided to by the city on the plat map of the city, and Brandy is correct. It's based upon pin placement, and now granted, we do realize that some of these lots don't always match up real well, but that's primarily due to some just of the projection of the drawings and the pictures sometimes don't always match up with the lot lines very well. But Brandy is correct. Those lines are based upon plat maps filed with the city.
Thank you, Todd.
But if we look at their petition and the resolution, we're rezoning what's legally described as the replat of Lot 4, which is 44 feet by 101 feet. So we're only replatting, or we're only rezoning 4,400 square feet plus adjacent right-of-way. So are we even rezoning that back 25 feet between what's legally described and the lake?
For the lot, now that goes back into extending a zoning district boundary, and I believe there's a provision in here, and I can find it, that would allow for the extension. So if they were to replat and include that, even though they actually can, their properties technically go to the ordinary high water mark. So I see where you're going with that, but it is also,
But we can only rezone what's petitioned to be rezoned. Isn't that correct? And they're only petitioning to rezone the replat of Lot 4 of DeVille Edition, which is the 44 by 101.
Correct. But that's where I'm gonna look here for that extension.
So all these other homeowners along there, they're gonna get this bonus 24 feet also?
Yeah, I mean, they technically,
Everybody has that bonus 24 feet.
and we use it for setbacks. So
Wow.
at the lake, the lakeside is considered a front yard. And so you have to have a 30-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark because that is technically your property line. So that's where you might get somebody, I mean, this property, for example, if this is accurate, I'll try turning on that contour line again. But, so this is 30 feet here. And I think actually it's further
From the
out.
shoreline, it's 30 feet from the shoreline.
Yep, and then so the structure could start building here. Instead of if you would actually take it from this lot line, I mean, you would be like, the whole thing is only 44 feet wide. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I could interject, I see Matt just put his hand up, so he's probably thinking the same thing I was. I think Matt's been working on his second Juris Doctorate degree, and some of the research he's done with lake ownership and property rights, not necessarily related to this particular case, but I was going to ask him to chime in on anything he might know to the contrary as far as how we've been applying this lot ownership out to the ordinary high water mark, and if he's found anything to the contrary in some of his research he's done lately.
Yeah, Mr. Roby?
Yeah, thanks, Heath. That's exactly what I was just gonna mention, is that just for the record, and I'm not sure if I don't think it changes how we're applying our setbacks. In fact, I know it doesn't, because I think it says high water mark in our ordinance, but there's a statute that talks about land that abuts navigable lakes and streams, that basically says that the adjacent landowner takes and owns all the way to the low water mark, not the high water mark. So in fact, regardless of what a plat or a legal description says, that statute states that the property owner adjacent takes to the low water mark.
Thank you, Mr. Roby.
Would our rezone be rezoning to the low water mark, or would it be rezoning what's written in the resolution, which is just the platted lot?
It would have to be to the low water mark. You wouldn't rezone. The statute contemplates that the property ownership extends to the low water mark. So whatever the property whatever the property is zoned extends to that low water mark. So I would say that there's just no scenario where you could not rezone all the way to the low water mark. You couldn't have a sliver in there that's zoned differently.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm just doing a quick check at 210507 Rules for Interpretation of the District Boundaries. Number 5 says boundaries indicated as following shorelines shall be construed to follow such shorelines, and in the event of a change of the shoreline shall be construed as moving with the actual shoreline. Boundaries indicated as approximately following the center line of streams, rivers, lakes, and other bodies of water shall be construed. So I'm saying that the boundary would go to the high water mark, which is the shoreline in this situation. And then it ebbs and flows depending on the height of the water.
So what you're saying is that your lot size is a moving target depending on how high and low the water is?
I think that's what the zoning district boundaries are. I'm not saying anything about ownership. I'm talking about the ordinance is specific that it follows the shoreline. So if the shoreline was 100 feet out into the lake, the zoning district would go out to that part of the lake. That's how I interpret it. Matt, do you read that differently?
So a year of a drought, you could build 100 feet into the lake?
They used to farm the bottom of that lake back in the 30s.
I know, but that's something else. I don't know.
I guess I would back us up a second and wonder what the actual practical effect of this conversation is.
It's my understanding that Jeff was just curious, are we able to zone that piece of ground up to the shoreline because it's not in the petition? And if that's why I think I'm trying to look for an answer, and I would say, I think it automatically happens whether it's in the lot description as it is, or if it actually goes to the shoreline, which I believe it does.
And so what I was trying to find here was in chapter 210507 for rules for interpretation of district boundaries. So where a district boundary line divides a lot, which is, well, so this is more so where a district boundary line divides a lot, which was in single ownership at the time of passage. It talks about extending that 50 feet beyond the district line. But it wouldn't actually be platted. Like, so the lot would stay the same, except technically they own to the ordinary high water mark. I don't know. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that? If it's just,
Yeah, Brandy, if I could chime in here quick too. I'm not sure that number 8 would apply here as far as applying that district boundary 50 feet beyond the district line. I think that's more intended for those split zoning boundaries that cross through neighboring lots, not following the lot lines. I think that's more what that section is referring to. But I think the Commissioner Brink's point, really the question at hand is the application adequate in showing the rezone boundaries that it shows, or should it be formally amended to extend to either the ordinary high water mark or low water mark for that matter, based on Matt's recent comment? And does it need to formally be changed to that, or can we just imply that that's what it is based on lake property ownership? I think is.
Yeah, because presumably the R1 zone as it is based on those platted lines, like is shown in the GIS, but the assumption is that it extends to that high water mark or low water mark.
I think we're talking semantics here.
Yeah.
The map shows it as being only those platted lots. However, the ordinance stipulates that it follows the shoreline.
yeah.
And so we could turn around and all we would have to do is draw on the map where the shoreline is. However, the shoreline ebbs and flows on any given year. So that's why the map itself shows the individual parcels being R1, but the ordinance says, no, it actually extends to the shoreline. That's my interpretation.
And to that point, Commissioner Kays just made, I think that's where you're going to have difficulty in finding a surveyor to clearly identify what that boundary is when it's fluctuating based on those parameters.
So the chapter that I referenced earlier, and I read 8, that was the one that I was most familiar with, that I was thinking back on, but actually, so 5 is what I believe Todd is referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree that one, that number 5 there would adequately handle this situation. I don't think there's any question that it goes to the shoreline from the description that's been provided.
Okay.
And I appreciate that. And the reason I asked this and brought us down this rabbit hole was because a few meetings ago, someone applied for a rezone and we tried to include their adjacent property, which they also owned, and we couldn't because that wasn't legally described in the petition. So I just wanted that clarification. So I think I got that and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have not opened the public hearing yet, so I will do so at this time. If there's anybody here to speak on behalf or against, now would be the time to do so.
Go ahead. No, you just come under sit. Sure. Yeah. I'm Ron DeVille. I own the property to the west. I had 2 buildings there. I sold one. Pratt or Casey and Allie Pratt bought that one closest to this property. You talk about the duplex. The duplex I live in would be 1062 and 1064. I built that in '76. That was legal. The city okayed it. Okay, the other one remodeled, and it's basically just a one deal, but we ended up putting a unit in there because of people visiting and this sort of thing, so they wanted a separate. But in that house there was It was basically a duplex anyway. I grew up in it. It had 2 bathrooms, 2 kitchens, 2 living rooms, 2 everything else. The only thing we did is we put in a wall. And that's about the only thing there. The seawalls, Mike Williams, I went with Mike Williams at the time, and what happened, we had old seawalls there. And I wanted not to move the old seawalls, I want to put in new seawalls. So we got the okay actually from the Corps and everything to do that. We went out beyond the old seawalls, and that's how that came about. My concern out there is if I can bring this up at the time, how are you going to? I haven't looked at a description of this new 5 duplex or 5 unit that they're going to put in there. I haven't looked at that yet, but where are they going to park when they have visitors? Where do they have? They're going to have boats. They're going to have this. They're going to have that. We're going to have that walking trail across the road now. Mayor says that we cannot pile snow on it. We can't do anything. The doctor bought this, was it 2 years ago? 2 years ago now. He bought Kurt Berg's land, turned it all into cities. So we have to ask him if we can blow snow over there. But it won't make any difference now because the mayor says we can't put snow on walking trails. So where are they going to put the snow? You know, and the traffic there is terrible. This is my concern. There's, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of 5 units in that area is too much. Anything else? No? Okay.
Does the board have any questions for Ron?
Thank you, Mr. DeVille. Madam Mayor, I see you have your hand up on the Teams.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that there are other jurisdictions that need to be involved in reclaiming, and the Game Fish and Parks would be one, and Mr. DeVille mentioned the Corps. So they would need to demonstrate that actually is, you know, before they could put fill. I see Brandy's trying to measure it. In the elevation 17,
19.1.
Yeah. Anyway, just that the Corps and the Game Fish and Parks would be involved in putting a seawall there. It's not just the city of Watertown that has jurisdiction. That was just my point.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good point.
And then how many feet of fill will they have to put in to be able to build on the lots?
Well, and it kind of depends. So if we even to look at it without, even if they wouldn't bring in fill, just that they were meeting the setbacks. So right now, this is pretty close from what GIS is showing in the LiDAR information, which is the floodplain elevations, or actually just all of the land elevations. So right now, they'd have to be 30 feet from that point, which is about where the house is today. So if they didn't now, but if say so I don't know why they would bring in fill, honestly, unless they just wanted more land. They wanted to reclaim the land, but they wouldn't have to.
My turn.
They're not in a flood zone in the elevation?
Yes, they are. So all of this pinkish red shading they are in the 100-year floodplain. So they would either bring in fill, sorry, that's what you're getting at. So they would either bring in fill when they were doing their new construction, depending on what the elevations are in proximity to the base flood elevation, but they still would be required to either bring in fill or elevate their structures so that the lowest finished floor was a foot above the 1724.8.
So what they want to do then is, with everybody's okey-doke on it, is that they're going to reclaim the land, get that extra 24 bonus land, reclaim the land, and then build it up.
And that's
to
where
build on it.
Not even necessarily, but they could do but with the correct permits through all of the different entities, they could do a situation with this seawall where they would reclaim. But really, I mean, they wouldn't have to, they wouldn't be required to. They would be required to elevate the structure so that it was meeting our floodplain regulations, which is that freeboard, which is the 1 foot above the base flood elevation. And so right now, why is it saying no data? So right now, like where the house sits today, it's about 1722.8. So they would need to be, that lowest finished floor would have to be at 1725.8 at a minimum. So they would potentially have to bring in 3 foot of fill or elevate. And then they wouldn't be able to have a basement. Their crawl space would have to be flood proofed with vents and not more than 4 feet in height, if that's how they were going to elevate. Or they could bring in fill.
Mr. Chair, this is Stacy. I just wanted to interject if I could for a moment.
Yep.
Just wanted to kind of remind the board that we would be looking at all of these things. While these are great questions, we would be looking at all of these things on down the line if the property was to be rezoned and we did see a building permit and things. So they're great questions. However, at this point, it's kind of speculative on what they may do. If the property were to be rezoned, we would be looking for any of the permitted uses that could go into the R3.
Yeah, that's a great point, and no speculation on variance requests today, as there's no variance request in front of us. It's simply the land use request, right?
That's correct.
Was there anybody else there to speak on
Yep.
public hearing?
Mike Lawrence. I just, my sister lives in this neighborhood. I know the Pratts. I've been over in that neighborhood. As you can see, there's multifamily. There's a high density. That's a very high density neighborhood. The houses are very close together. I think that this is a good suited place for that. We have a definite need for people to come out to Lake Kempesca. This is a huge draw for it. I mean, it's obviously my competition, but I believe in access to Lake Kempesca. I believe that this is another option for people to get access to Lake Kempesca. As far as the argument before, as far as the seawall in and out, I got a seawall put in at my place, and it took my lot line out. I got it resurveyed. I didn't come in and get it rezoned to R1 when I reclaimed the lake. So, I mean, I see that kind of being similar in this atmosphere. But as far as that road, you have state parks on that road. It's going to be a high use road. That's where you want R3 and not R1 maybe. Is in a more high use area. So it fits in with the neighborhood. It has adjoining land that are multifamily housing. And I'd just like to see people get more access. And I think that the developer here is doing a really good job to find unique ways to add to Lake Kempesca. So just wanted to put that out there that I definitely am for this development, even though it is competition to our condos. It gives access and it gives another. You go to Marina Bay. If anyone knows about the condos at Marina Bay, is the only way you get one is if you know someone who is going to be leaving those condos. Condos at the lake are very high and desirable. So that's what I have out there. I just wanted to show my support for projects around the lake and taking out some structures that are less than desirable and putting in a new nice structure on the property.
What is
Thank you,
Marina
Mr.
Bay
Lawrence.
zoned?
Good question. Those condos are zoned R3. Let's
But
see here.
their lots are much larger, correct? And they have a private road coming into them, and then they have their garages, extra garage across the road from each one of them, correct?
Yep, and so looks like they condo platted potentially, or like I said before, they would probably meet the minimum lot size requirement. But you can see that they are linear and so they have about 9,000 square feet actually because of how linear they are. So, zooming in where I don't want it to. 7,000 with that one, so.
But how far back from the shoreline to the houses are they?
It looks about 93 feet, but actually from where that's where the plat goes to, but it looks like from the shoreline and that, and the seawall there is like 69, 70.
So they're set back farther
Yep.
than what this lot would require setbacks, correct?
Well, and so but every lot around adjacent to Lake Compesca, the minimum setback requirement for that front yard is 30 feet. So they could have went closer, just chose not to. And I see you want to show that.
Eric Scott, I'm the developer. I've got the land under contract, and so the application comes from Dan and Kathy Gabriel, but it's through Crestone Companies and myself. So I'm here to answer questions. I think this plat is a little bit telling, just to make everybody aware of the future plan. And I think my understanding, and when Brandy and I talked, the proper protocol would be to apply for rezoning. And then if we get the rezoning, then we would talk about a variance. I would need a variance to build anything because this is not a buildable lot without a variance. It's very shallow. If you comply with the front yard or 2 front yard setbacks, they're going to overlap each other. So we've got less than a buildable lot without a variance. So that would come later. But I think what's up on the photograph or on the, through the paper that I put down here.
I don't know where it keeps going.
There it is. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, and actually, I do have it pulled up. This paper
Oh, yeah,
is
you
on
can
the
pull it
screen.
up that way too. Oh, yeah, just pull up the screen. That's much easier. Yeah, so so I think this is a little bit telling, and my goal was to get it far enough off of South Lake Drive to make sure you could pull a vehicle in, to either comply with how it's far back it's currently set, or make it even a little bit further back. And this is where we arrived with a conceptual plan of the footprint of what we'd be putting in. You can see that from that drawing, it would actually be further off the road than the neighboring properties, and so that would allow vehicles to park further off the road. I know the question will come up, and in the variance probably, and the stature of the structure. One of the solutions to make this so you could get parking on this very shallow lot and actually build something there and improve the property is to go vertical. So if we can park underneath the structure, now we don't have to park in front of the structure most of the time. So that's the idea. So happy to answer any questions, but we would intend to put in a seawall and extend that lot line and the buildable right back.
So you can see, I'm going to try to draw it on here, but you can see that, and actually let me just wing it quick. So on the street side would be 9.7 feet, which is about where that current structure is today. You can see the neighboring property. And this is all things too that we can get into after we really look into just, is the land appropriate to be zoned R3? And then if he would come forward with the variance, that's when we really can get into this. That's where I think it'd be more appropriate.
Is this spot zoning like this where you just hike one lot instead of like the R3s like over at Bayview, and then when you go farther down where them townhouses where each side is sold separately, that are R3, but this would just be a lot.
Yes.
Is that common practice to just do a lot zoning?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I want to talk, maybe address what Commissioner Letsky has to say. And again, from a standpoint of being a spot zoning, and I've talked about my not wanting to see spot zoning. The difference here for me at the lake is that when the lake was brought into city limits, by and large, everything was zoned R1 when it first came in. And many, many years, we've always talked about trying to look at the zoning at the lake. We've created the commercial lake district to allow some flexibility for commercial type uses. We know that the residential zoning district of an R1 completely around the lake is probably not appropriate. And I think I see us someday going down the road where we could have a lake residential zone, which would allow certain types of residential structures to be a permitted use and certain types of residential structures to be a conditional use. And I do see that we have a proximity of R3 in the area. I think, while it might be considered a spot zone, it is generic. It is similar to other zoning in that area. But I think it, again, gets us into the area where we need to be thinking about what is the highest and best zoning district to be utilized at the lake, because not every aspect of the lake is solely an R1 zoning district. And that's where I'm at with it, my opinion. Thank you.
I would just add to that, the spot zone or the zone that is R1 is actually still either R2 or R3 type of use in there. It's several duplexes, so.
How many units are you planning on?
I'm planning for 5 units.
1-bedroom units?
Correct.
So you're assuming 1 vehicle per unit?
Correct.
So 5 garages underneath and then living above?
Correct.
Which that's something that I think we've talked before about the off-street parking requirements at the lake and how to try to deal with that and the driveway sizes and setbacks, all of it together. I mean, really what should just be in a lake residential district. But typically you have to have 1 off-street parking for each bedroom that doesn't, like the garage actually doesn't count. So that might be another variant situation.
So, and then are you condoing these out, or are they going to be rental units, or?
Not rentals. They would be condos. I would envision probably more, vacation type homes that would be utilized more in the summer. You never know. Some people may live there year round, but that's what I would envision using there. And again, you can see or for me, as I look at it, I guess you see the plat and I see several vehicles parked out in front of these houses that are quite a bit closer to the road. So there would still be room. Again, ours will be further back off of the road, so there would be room to park out front towards the road and not, it would of course be in the right of way just as these other vehicles are. The one's almost 100% in the right of way, but there would be that opportunity and to be safely off the road, and that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I accomplished.
So what's your thinking instead of just, sticking with what's in the neighborhood already with duplexes? What's the advantage of going to 5 units instead of just building a duplex and selling both halves of that?
Sure, shoreline on Lake Campesca is incredibly expensive, and my goal is to keep it as affordable as possible so more people can enjoy the lake.
So you plan on putting 5 docks out there then?
I'd like to, yes, and I've got a plan for that, and it stays well inside of our property boundaries, so it'd be similar to the Marina Bay or is a Bayview type of docking system. And it's really only 3 docks. It's a finger dock, but the 3 docks, you got a boat on each side. So I didn't bring a picture of that, but I made sure it was feasible.
It's all good discussion. It's certainly going to be, appropriate for any variance request if something does come before us for a variance request. But, at hand today is really the conversation of zoning and whether or not multi-residential dwelling unit is appropriate for this area.
Can I ask Mr. DeVille a question? Yes. Would you ever be willing to, so from R3 to R2, the lot that we're talking about, you're in between, would you ever be willing to go to R3 zoning?
Well, the duplex I live in now, I'm not renting anymore. I'm using
Ron.
that as one full.
You come up here. We'll swap. You can use the mic.
The duplex I live in, it'd be 1062, 1064. I'm not renting that out anymore. I'm done with these renters. And so that I'm just going to use for family visiting. My daughter and I are just going to put bedrooms in there. Just it's that. Casey and Allie Pratt over there, they're basically, it seems like they just have all these visitors people. They can't, I don't think they'll ever rent that little area out. So they're, and they're against this. This guy that was here, I don't even know who he was that was bringing up Casey and Allie. But I just talked to Allie. Allie's in Texas with her dad, and then Casey's he works for Terex, so he's in Denver right now. So, they're concerned,
So you would be against rezoning your property to R3. You want to stay R1?
Well, kind of deals with you people, but I wouldn't have to now because I'm not going to, and my daughter will inherit it, so she just wants to keep it as a, and then when I was raising kids years ago, I just busted a hole in the wall, and I had both sides, and I had kids to raise, and then we, when they all moved out, I kind of put it back to, and that's kind of the way we're doing things. So R3, I don't know what the taxes go up or whatever goes with R3. I don't know that. No. So, but Allie's coming back on Tuesday. I don't know if you want to probably visit with her or want me to drag her up here when there's another meeting, so you can kind of get an idea what they're thinking. Another thing is when they go and they build that up 3 feet, where's that water going to go? That's another thing. That seawall is only about 6 inches. The top of that seawall, and then you drop 6 inches on there. They put 3 feet over there, and there's going to be a neighbor problem, and all this. And then how far does that building have to be from Casey and Allie's building? Is there an 8 feet in between the buildings? And I'm seeing all kinds of things out there. So you got to be 8 feet between the structures on both sides?
9 feet.
9 feet?
And then two, as far as the drainage goes, that would all be looked at. Because we do have the floodplain regulations where you do have to build to that freeboard elevation. And then just as far as the neighbors' concerns, I did receive an email from one of the neighbors, and they wanted to be anonymous, but they didn't have a problem with the rezone.
How far do they live away from there? They're living on the other side of the lake.
No, it's an adjacent neighbor.
Okay.
And I think that's as far as I should say.
Would they be willing to go R3 also then? I'm just wondering, okay, now we're going to allow this one go R3 and 5 houses down. Oh, I want to be R3 too, and someone wants to be, so we're just going to do like little stepping stones throughout instead of being a little more consistent. That's why I asked, Mr. DeVille if he would be willing to go R3 also then, and so it's not just
well, that's all right. But then I have a brother named Pork. Now he's between Brad and all that in there, and he don't, I can talk him into it, but I suppose, but we can do that, Bonnie. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that what we're talking about right now is we want to do like this lot and then 5 lots down. Someone might want to cash in and build 6 condos, and then, or is that what we're going to go for at the lake?
No, I think that what we could do is that when these properties that are in between them, if they would ask for a building permit application, it could be that we would advise them to rezone because their use is non-conforming, or they would need a variance. And then I want to provide some clarity too, because that kind of wasn't a awkward position because I did talk to other adjacent landowners where there were concerns, and I thought that they were actually going to be here, but I just don't want anybody to feel like I'm putting any words in their mouth as them being anonymous. So, just
Mr.
with
Chair?
questions.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case.
you know, I think we've been wandering all over the place. I think it gets back to the question of whether or not this is an appropriate zoning district for an intended use within that R3 zoning district. You know, what happens with the DeVille's property moving forward is really not germane to the discussion at this point. I personally think that, you know, in my opinion, I previously stated that I think the R1 zoning district for the entire lake is a misnomer. And based upon some of the things that we've talked about in the land use plan, offering some hopefully different types of development opportunities at the lake, this would be a stepping stone. If at some point in time the property adjacent to this is rezoned to an R2 or an R3, or maybe we come up with the better lake residential zone, which allows some flexibility in it, I think that's something that's going to happen down the road one way or the other. I'd like to bring it, if it's possible, if we could just bring it back into this specific parcel and decide to move forward one way or the other.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Case. I do have the public hearing open. Is there anybody, one last time, I'll ask if there's anybody here that hasn't spoken to the public already that would like to speak before I close the public hearing.
Hello, my name is Aaron Hansen. I live just down the street at 1082 South Lake Drive. I think Ron brings up some good points. I don't disagree with some of his points that they need to be considered, but more variance issues, you know, such as the setback from the lake. I think setbacks primarily are to provide a barrier between your neighbors, whereas when you look at the setback to the lake, you really don't have a neighbor other than boats that are going by. So I don't know that the setback to the lake is really overly relevant. I mean, I know it's part of the conditions, but I think that maybe that should be looked at when you look at a variance. I do support, overall, I support more people having access to the lake, and I think that anytime you can take down a couple of properties or that are less than desirable and improve upon that and have access and provide some parking for those people that are utilizing it, I think that's a good thing. I know that I've spoken with other neighbors in that area, quite a few that support it. I don't really want to name their names because they're not here to speak on their own behalf, but for the most part, I think everybody feels pretty similar to the way I do. As long as you do it right and it's an attractive building, that it's a good thing. So, thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else there to speak in the open?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Heath here. If I could address one of Commissioner Oleski's concerns on I think it was her that brought up the spot zoning question. And I know Commissioner Case touched on that briefly. I think, you know, from a staff standpoint, we've talked about spot zoning in the recent past on other rezone applications. This one, I just did run the calculations too. It does meet the minimum density requirements for an R3 zoning district. And per our ordinance, the way this one would fall is between 3 and 5 dwelling units, or excuse me, between 3 and 8 dwelling units. And then it kicks us over to another table, and the overall square footage requirement is based on the number of bedrooms per dwelling unit. This being 1 bedroom per dwelling unit equates to 1,300 square foot per dwelling unit. So you take that 1,300 times 5, and we're back to the minimum lot size requirements that we were administering and talking about earlier. That would be 6,500 square feet. My point being is that a standalone R3 district can be as small as what, in this case, could be as small as 6,500 square feet for a 5-unit single bedroom setup or arrangement. So we are meeting the minimum district size requirements in that respect. And just wanted to point that out for the board's knowledge. And then as far as, you know, whether we would consider this a spot zone, you know, when we talked about the definition of spot zoning and what that looks like, as far as it being a favorable decision to the applicant, and I'm paraphrasing here, but being a favorable decision to the applicant that is compromising the integrity of the zoning regulations in general across the community. I would say that in this case, from a staffing standpoint, you do have a very comparable use, obviously. When you talk about transition zoning, you're going from R1 to an R2 or an R3, and then out into the more egregious zoning districts that allow more intense uses. So I think from that standpoint, you have an R3 next to an R1. I'm sure this probably is the only case we would see this throughout town, but you have those comparable residential uses is what I also wanted to point out from a spot zoning standpoint. I wouldn't necessarily raise a red flag to say that this would be one of those cases.
Thank you, Heath.
This is Stacy. If I could chime in as well, I support that. What Mr. Von I just explained. It's pretty common to see a mix of residential densities anymore. Some of the larger cities, it's kind of becoming a nationwide trend to get rid of some of the single family districts and, you know, allow single family and allow multifamily. And I know that that's happening, you know, predominantly in the cities, but it's becoming more and more common to have a mix of residential densities in the same vicinity.
Was there somebody on the team session here that wanted to speak?
Hi, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm on the phone with my mother, Joanne Rody. I'm Gretchen Rody, and we own the property at 1046 South Lake Drive. And listening to some of the discussion, I think some of the concerns that we have, I think they talked about parking with the 5 units. We have many years. I think they talked about with the 5 units. Many years. I think they talked about. Is that back there? Many years.
Do you have your video on in the background by chance?
Yeah. Joanna, are you on? You mute your line? Actually, I'll call back. I'll right back.
Okay.
Okay, we'll give them a second to call back in.
In the meantime, I guess I would like to make this comment. If we were talking about a lot in, let's just pick a neighborhood, and it's surrounded by R1s, would we consider doing this project amongst R1 homes? Like Mr. DeVille said, my concern, and I maybe it's not my concern because I'm not going to be the one moving the snow, but where are you going to put that? And that's always a concern, I guess, at the lake. Where are you going to, push it to? Maybe they're going to hire it and have it removed. So, we can't go looking for trouble. But my concern is kind of with chiming in with Bonnie it is spot zoning. And if we were doing this in another part of town, would we do it? And, I don't know that I would want to be the one that owns that property next to it to the, I guess we'll say to the east, going from, is that going to devalue my property now that I am next to a 5-plex? I don't know.
A 5-plex that's going to be 3 stories high.
And I get where Eric is coming from. I mean, I appreciate that. I just am, again, I'm always kind of the person, kind of like on the last issue, 20 years from now, are we going to say, what were they doing? And that's, I guess, where I try to go, is to think outside. And maybe I think too small. Maybe I'm thinking the wrong way. And the next generation's going to say, this is the coolest thing ever built. So.
This is Ford. I totally agree with Rhonda. I I am concerned significantly about parking, and that raises the safety issue. Certainly with the bike trail going in across the street there, somewhere down the road, I think that's a huge concern. And I also sympathize with Mr. DeVille and his concern about the peacefulness of his property. And I just am looking at the purpose and objectives of our zoning laws here in the city ordinances. And it's number 5 is to prevent excessive population densities and overcrowding of the land with structure. And I think that's exactly what this does. And I also, in my black and white thinking, believe this is an incident of spot zoning. And we have, in the past, gone to great lengths to correct spot zoning, not create spot zoning.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. I believe we have the member of the public here back on the line to speak.
Hi, I'm sorry. My name is Gretchen Rohde, and Joanne Rohde is my mother who owns the property. She's not on the line with me. But the property that we own is 1046 South Lake Drive, which is just adjacent to the proposed R3 zoning lot. And some of the concerns that other people have raised, I believe we've got the same concerns. Having 5 individual units on that small lot is a concern just from a parking perspective. This is a cabin, our house that we've had in our family for many years. And I know just having some people come out to the lake, parking has been really tight. And if you multiply that times 5 with, potentially having guests over there, I can see, quite a bit of not only traffic, but parking congestion as well on that area of the lake. The other concern, and this may be more of a variance issue than the zoning issue, is the seawall and reclaiming the lake, because it's already been reclaimed on one side of our lot. And if it gets reclaimed on the other side, we have a seawall issue on one side, we'd have it on the other side as well. And also from a flood perspective, if everything is raised, we're going to be, at the lower part of that too, and have a flood risk there. So those would be the concerns that we would have. And one other thing is snow removal as well. Right now, as it is, it's really tight in the winter to find a place to even remove the snow when people are, plowing the driveway. So those are some of the concerns that my mother would like to raise.
Thank you, Ms. Rohde. And thank you for calling back in.
Thank you.
Just a couple notes from me. I mean, maybe we're off in the weeds a little bit, but they've been brought up. So going vertical is a solution to get parking indoors and having the opportunity to not park on the road. Significant improvement over what the neighbors can currently do that have some of the concerns on this property, but perhaps not their own, which I feel is a little bit hypocritical. But snow removal obviously is always an issue, whether it's an in-town lot or wherever we move snow. I have land, I have properties that we have to move snow on, and I wouldn't own these. The intent is to sell them, but that's an issue. There are solutions, right? We move a lot of snow off of North Lake Drive. We've had a couple clients over there just off of the highway, and that's a highway, and we have to truck the snow off. It's just what you do when you're on that type of lot. So I think it's improvement. And then as far as property values are concerned, if you saw what was there, I would think a nice building, even though it's multifamily, would significantly improve the value of the neighboring property and not cause it to decline. So just wanted to make those points.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. At this time, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case.
motion to approve Resolution 2020-49.
Could I have a motion by Mr. Case to approve the resolution as presented? Do we have a second? Is there a second to the motion so we can bring about discussion?
I'll second the motion.
A second by Brink. A discussion by the board members?
I'm just, am not in favor of a bunch of spot zonings, because like in 5 years down the road, there's another cabin that, hey, you know what, doesn't matter, we can cut them, break it down and put up 3 more condos or 8 more condos or whatever they want to do. And I think I just don't want to see a lot and have spot zoning. If this was in a different subdivision where it's all R1 zoning, let's say along Skyline Drive, this would not be allowed.
And I think as far as comparing it to neighborhoods that are within the city, not the lake necessarily, or city proper, I guess more so, we do try to have transitional zoning. But I think that what we're getting at with the lake and like kind of when we had that highway commercial zoning happening on the north side, it was that we didn't have the proper district, the zoning district for that. So it was looking at with what we have. I think that in developing the lake residential district, I think that trying to incorporate more mixed densities for redevelopment is something that, we should look at. So hopefully, within a reasonable amount of time that we could have a lake residential district, similar to like what we did for the lake commercial, and we were able to make that happen with, it didn't take too much time, but this one it is unique. We've always stated that the lake is unique and setbacks, everything, nothing's consistent. So really, we will push to get that, but I think that we would look at having more mixed residential districts around here rather than the typical transitional zoning, while still trying to protect because these properties are valuable and there's a lot. They're primarily single family residential, so we'll need to look at it holistically to make sure we're protecting the existing property rights as well. So it will be an endeavor.
And in fitting with the land use plan, looking at the adjacent properties here in this case, where they have either currently or historically had multifamily dwellings present. To me, it would be nice if this was all one continuous strip of R3. That'd be the ideal scenario, I think. But that's not what's before us today.
Right.
I'm in agreement with staff and Blake from the perspective that I'm looking at the uses. Maybe the zoning doesn't adequately affect the use. I'm looking again to the future as far as what I think the land use plan and the commentary from the public is to make more opportunities for a variety of residential development out there. I would not want to be doing a checkerboard of spot zoning amongst areas where we don't have other higher densities. But in this situation, I think it's what maybe drives us and becomes the fulcrum to getting us to do our jobs and look at the lake perhaps differently also into the future and create the regulations that properly and adequately address long-range development. I will be supporting the motion.
I would like to see this just stay R2. I would like to see that I would be in favor of this lot going R2 where there would be a duplex. The parking is a concern. If I'm a single person, if I have 2 friends, if I can find 2 friends, I'm adding to that parking issue there. And now you divide times 5, so now we have 10 cars parking there. And granted, a house we could have 10 cars there, but I'm just saying that's just 2 friends over. I think the 5 unit is a bit much. A single bedroom, they don't have a place for a guest to even stay, or I don't know. I feel that It's just too congested in that area, and I'd like to see it go R2. I'd be for it.
Any additional comments from board members before we take a vote?
The spot zoning
Yeah, Mr.
topic is
Chair,
always
This is Bill.
Yes, Bill.
Yeah, so I wholeheartedly agree and agree with, endorse the other board members' comments as well as the community there. When I hear what the discussion, I look at what's before us. I do agree a holistic look at the lake and the zoning in accordance with the land use is something that we should be taking on. But in this situation, I do have to take consideration the adjacent property owners, and they had purchased their properties under the current zoning, and the ability for them to also have time to consider future impacts and give them some decision space in this as well. Making this decision here today would probably deny them some of that opportunity, whereas a more thorough, take a longer approach would probably be more appropriate.
Any additional comments before we take a vote?
The spot zoning topic is always a very hard one. We have some zones that have minimum zone requirements and then other zones that don't. It's always a tough topic. One thing I try to look at, when we vote on approving the R3 zone, is are we saying those uses are available and will they fit? And we know that this use that's coming, that the applicant that's going to come back here is planning to come back with variances for setbacks, so we know the lot isn't able to fit into our ordinance that way, and size and stuff too. So it just makes this one a tough fit, I feel.
I would love to see this project on a bigger lot. I'll say it that way. I'm not even maybe so concerned about the spot zoning if the neighbors aren't opposed to it, but I think the lot is just pretty tight for 5 units.
So with the lot, it is a width of 57 feet. And so even if you would have a single family home, your setbacks would still be the same, so you would need a variance regardless of what you were going to build on that lot. Unless you can build an 8-foot wide structure. Or no,
I think
sorry,
at this time,
3.
if there's no additional discussion from the board, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Are we ready for that?
Everybody?
All right.
Okay.
Dolly.
No.
Spire.
No.
Ford.
No.
Kays.
Yes.
Brink.
No.
Aletsky.
No.
Dargits Johnson.
No.
Motion fails. 5-1. 6-1.
That's the count I had too.
Or like 1-6 probably is more appropriate.
All right, with that, we'll move on and we'll talk about item 6B on the agenda, resolution number 2020-37.
Okay, thank you, Blake. So this has came before the board here a couple different times. Obviously, this is the ordinance amendment to the subdivision procedure, chapter 2406. And just to save time really, so staff wants to still make sure that I want to compare it to our engineering design standards and make sure that we're not missing anything there where the overlap is happening and we don't have just to have consistent language. So once again, the latest version is attached here to this agenda. And I did include a clean copy because obviously the amended version was getting messy. So if you want, or if you can review that and make sure to get any comments to me, we are hoping to have this for actual action on November 5th. So it is obviously, it's a large undertaking, and we would just want to make sure that we're not missing anything and getting it right and making sure that we can keep everything as consistent as possible between all of our manuals and the ordinance and all that fun stuff. So staff is asking for the action to postpone to the November 5th meeting.
So for that, we would need a motion and a second from the board.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Kays. Do you have a second?
Ford seconds.
All right, we'll take a vote on that.
Okay, Dargis Johnson?
Yes.
Oleski?
Yes.
Brink?
Yes.
Kays?
Yes.
Ford?
Yes.
Spire?
Yes.
Dolly?
Yes, that motion passes, and we'll postpone that to the November 5th meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, well, that'll bring us then to item 6C on the agenda. We have some ordinance amendment discussion around auto body shops.
Yes, thank you, Blake. So this is kind of a 3-in-1 because they're all related. And as Blake stated, they are related to auto body repair shops. And just looking at our ordinance and uses throughout the community, our ordinance doesn't really touch on auto body repair shops. It does touch on the service station for motor vehicles or for motor vehicle sales and or repair. So right now, currently the ordinance allows for a service station for motor vehicles in the C3 Highway Commercial District as a permitted use. And then it has kind of a different definition for the I-1 Light Industrial District, and so that is motor vehicle sales and or repair, and that is a permitted use within the I-1 district. But the definition specifically for the service, let me see here, for the service station, it exclusively states that spray paint operations or body repair is not permitted. So really, we don't even touch on auto body repair shops being allowed anywhere within the community, which obviously isn't the intent or what we want. So what this is doing is creating a definition for auto body repair shops, and that is one ordinance amendment you'll see as number 3. And the definition we came up with for that is body work repair for automobiles offering paintwork repairs and spray paint operations. And so that will be that'll be added to ordinance as a conditional use in the C3 Highway Commercial District, and then as a permitted use in the I-1 Light Industrial District, and then subsequently is allowed by permitted use then in the I-2 Heavy Industrial, because the I-2 allows anything as a permitted use as the I-1 district allows as a permitted use. The reason for having it be a conditional use in the C3 district is just because with the spray paint operation, there can be smells associated or, vehicles, outdoor storage, all of that, where it might be something that we just want to look at more in detail if somebody is requesting to do that type of use.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Brandy, why aren't we looking at the C1 district? I can think of at least almost 4 or 5 auto body businesses in the C1.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea to have it as an option.
That actually does make sense, to add that in possibly as a conditional use, to the C1 as well.
That. I mean, I think I can almost think of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
That's an oversight.
I believe that the commission could add that in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah, we can.
But
we as a planning commission can make a recommendation or an amendment, and then as long as that amendment's noticed at the city council before the adoption, we can do that.
well, but wouldn't we have to have a separate public notice since it's a different chapter? And so because of that, I mean, even if we acted on these today, we could hold off on bringing these to council until we get that. We could bring the C1, well, if I can get a notice, which might be pushing it, for if we got the C1 ordinance amendment to the November 5th Plan Commission meeting, and then we could bring them to council for first and second hearing at the same meetings. But Matt, can you provide any detail on that, if we would have to do a separate notice for this, if we're going to amend the C1 district?
I think we just talked about this recently, that notice and hearings for zoning ordinance text amendments, I don't believe, well, no, I take that back. They are required. Unless, I guess I'd have to look at the notice of hearing to see how specific it was. If it didn't include that zone, then I think that there needs to be another notice and another hearing, if it didn't reference the zone.
Right.
I would tend to agree with Matt there too. The only thing I was thinking is that being that we aren't the final body of disposition on this, and there is a public hearing and there's public discourse, maybe, and if in the future, if nothing else, my recommendation to staff would be to include language in the public hearing notice that says that the planning commission may make a recommendation with or without amendment to the city council moving forward.
Right, and actually, isn't that in state statute already? Or is it in our ordinance? But because what I did is just to keep it as simple as possible, because they have to be separate ordinance amendments because there's different chapters, then I notice each, so I sent out 3 notices for this ordinance amendment, which is why, I mean, that's an expense, so that's why if we could act on these tonight, and then we could just follow up with the C1 if that's deemed necessary. Obviously, I think it makes sense that we would, but if we would need a separate notice sent out, that I could hold off on bringing all of them to City Council for their first reading until we have them all together.
Mr. Chair, I would defer to staff on however they want to proceed. My only intention initially was just to bring up the fact that there are body shops downtown.
Yeah, I understand the intent.
And Mr. Chair, I'll chime in quick too. I think staff getting together and determining definitively, this comes up pretty often, to what extent can this board amend anything we bring before you and still carry on the process to the next level without having to start all over from square one. I think we would all agree we want to keep the process as proficient as we can and move forward within the bounds of what we legally can do without having to go back at square one and start over. So I think it's a great idea for us to try to put this discussion to bed, so to speak, and between Matt and myself and Stacy and Brandy, maybe dig into that a little deeper and try to get some level of clarity and moving forward to Commissioner Kay's stance there on that too. I would echo the need for that just from a staffing standpoint. Wanting to make sure we're following all the rules we need to, but yet also wanting to make sure we're as proficient as we can be.
Yep, that sounds fair.
Matt, I can talk to you about a county circuit court case in Turner County that would help you shed a little light on that.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I think that just in general, if you were proposing to tweak some language to what's been proposed or to tweak something else in relation to the district that was called out, or excuse me, in the district that was called out, I could see just moving forward with it, but bringing in an entire district that wasn't noticed, I think, is a step too far. And so that's that's where I would draw the line.
Yeah, and that's even when I send out the notices, I do leave them, I just open it up to say that there's an amendment to chapter 2128, for example, and then that's all of the C3 highway commercial district. So if there was something within there if it, whatever the ordinance is amending, that it does open it up a little bit to, for additional amendments to be made to that. But just so the notice is.
Within the chapter.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want it to become like, what they call them in Pier, Todd, a hog house.
Yeah, and that happens all the time. We don't want to hog house things. I mean, we got to be careful. But I think if there's a rational nexus to what the intent of the public hearing notice is, I think we're fine. But this might be a bridge too far on this. And so I like I said, let's move on these three and come back and fix it later.
Sounds good. So then we'll need separate motions for each number item. So for 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, before we get to that, I will open the public hearing on this discussion here, if anybody is here to speak on behalf or against. Ms. Ford?
You know, I love definitions, and I love definitions that are really specific. And I'm looking at this definition, which says bodywork repair for automobiles. Should it be a wider word than automobiles, or is automobiles a generic term like Kleenex for facial tissue now? I want to be sure that motorcycles and trailers and anything that might go to an auto body repair shop is included in this definition.
Is there a statute definition comparison there?
Yeah, so when I came up with this, and Diana, I actually do think of you when I create definitions.
I wonder why, Brandy. I love
That's good.
And okay, so when we talk, and I mean, I'm not opposed to making it broader. But let me try to circle back on, I think it came from the service station. So, I mean, there they have motor vehicles, so I guess we could, if, I don't know, if we need to, I don't know. Anyone else have any thoughts?
That's why I asked, I don't know, that's why I asked the question.
I think in the ordinance, it also allows the planning commission to make the determination of what the definition is if it's unclear, but more often than not, an auto body would be just that. It would be an auto body repairman. I mean, it wouldn't be for bringing in tractors and farm machinery and those types of things.
No, but I'm talking about a motorcycle. That's not an automobile. Someone who has a little pull behind trailer that you pull behind your car. Those are sometimes repainted, sprayed. A pickup truck. I'm not talking about farm implements. I'm talking about things that we all have in our yards that aren't automobiles that might go to an auto body repair shop.
Well, I would just look at a general definition of automobile. It's a road vehicle, typically with 4 wheels, provided by internal combustion engine or electronic motor, able to carry a small number of people. So
that would not include a motorcycle then.
Right.
Or trailer, because a trailer has no engine.
Well, maybe the I don't know. Does
Equipment?
the city have a definition of automobile in the?
That's where I was wondering if there was another definition in statute, either in city or state.
Well, and we talk like motor vehicle for like a service station, but I'm wondering if maybe we could say equipment. Let me find where that definition is here.
I think too, if I could chime in quick, as far as other terms like equipment, you might invite combines and tractors being worked on in this facility that maybe you didn't plan on. I don't know, maybe one thought to ponder is, an auto body shop is a general, commonly known term to understand what that facility is doing as far as a use goes.
So maybe I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead. I mean.
No, sorry, go ahead. And it was Heath there, by the way, just.
Yes.
For the
So I guess, chime in, I'm just doing some Googling here. So Apologize for that, but
we just
the Department
eliminate
of
the term?
Justice. The Department of
Could we
Justice has motor vehicle defined as road vehicles such as automobiles, vans, motorcycles, and trucks, as well as off-road vehicles. Is that a acceptable definition?
Hey, Mr. Chair, this is Bill. From an insurance professional's perspective, just, from looking at classifications every day, I would say yes, that's probably more precise. And I'd also look to see, what what they teach and certify coming out of LATI, the products they're producing, how they classify those professionals that are feeding into these shops.
Mr. Chair, this is Stacy. I just pull up a different definition just for the board's consideration. This particular definition is out of a zoning ordinance, and auto body shall mean motor vehicles and shall include, but not limited to, automobiles, trucks, buses, and motorcycles. And then we could put whatever else there as well. So it would include that, but not limited to. So that would just be another way of phrasing it if there are concerns that this definition needs to be a little broader.
Yeah, I would agree that's a pretty good definition, because if you look up automobile and under the insurance sections of South Dakota codified law, it's specific to four-wheeled vehicles and trailers.
And
I would look to add, is there going to be exclusion for recreational vehicles and trailers?
So do you think that we could add to this definition, because most likely, for the most part, the business, automobiles is what's going to probably be repaired. But do you think that we could say, and this will keep it consistent with our ordinance, to say bodywork repair for motor vehicles and or trailers, and then we take care of anything with the motor? Is that okay? Or
you've got plenty of body shops that do both auto body and engine repair.
Mm-hmm. And it includes welding and fabrication.
Yep. Painting, everything.
Yep.
I would be so inclined, to back Commissioner Ford's suggestion that we have a definition that's inclusive of all those things, so that we don't have to come back and change it later. And I would give staff the ability to take that on and have that ready for the city council when they're ready to pass on this.
we can tweak it and we can bring this one back to you guys, so you can see what we come up
we're
with.
going to have a separate hearing on the C1 anyway, right?
Yep.
Would it be appropriate just to revise the definition and bring that back at the same time?
Yeah, I think so.
Then maybe then the proper, once the public hearing's over, the proper motion would be to postpone action on these resolutions until a subsequent date. Just take it all up at that.
If we're gonna split it, it does make sense that we would just bring it all back together then at that time.
Yeah, I agree. And so if we do the second meeting in November, that'll give sufficient time and allow us to properly notice.
Was there anybody there to speak in the public?
No, I don't think.
Doesn't appear that there's anybody on the team's call for the public hearing, so we'll close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, motion to postpone to the second meeting in November.
Which is November 19th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have to take a separate motion for each resolution, or can we do a motion to postpone all the resolutions?
Matt, what do you
That's
think?
my intent.
Yeah, you can do it in one fell swoop. That's fine.
Ford seconds.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a vote on that.
Who made the original motion?
Yeah.
Todd?
Okay, sounds good. All right, Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries. We'll see that back here in a few weeks. Move on to, let's see, 6D on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Blake.
2020-56.
So this is an amendment to Chapter 2102, Administration and Enforcement. And this goes back to where we had lengthy discussion a while back now. No, let me get down to it. Where we wanted to make our, oh geez, we're all over the place. Wanted to make our ordinance consistent with state statute. So this is just changing the voting requirements for conditional uses. So right now, with our variances and conditional uses, we have the concurring vote of at least 2/3 of the members of the board shall be necessary to decide in favor of the applicant. And then, but what state statute has is, it says, notwithstanding the foregoing, conditional uses shall be determined by an affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of the present and voting members of the board. So for conditional uses, it'll be for, because, okay, also going back, for the Board of Adjustment to conduct business, you have to have 5 members present because it's 2/3 of the members, which there's 7 members, and so 5 makes that. So then that's your quorum, but then now that's still it. And maybe Matt, do you want to explain this?
So
Can I interject a little bit here?
go ahead, Todd.
The statute doesn't say 2/3. The statute says that it's to be determined by the community. So we could select 51%. We can make 75%. We have the ability to establish what that voting requirement is. The only thing that we don't have the authority to do is to make it nothing but present and voting members of the board.
In your opinion.
I think the attorney that maybe would represent us from the Assurance Alliance would agree with that.
That you didn't know.
Anyway.
So, and here I included on the agenda the 2 statutes that's referring to. So basically, if you have now, and 2, like Blake has asked, that we include these requirements on the agenda so it's just clear, and I mean that we're not constantly wondering what it is for a vote for. I'm losing words. Action to be approved.
I'd like to ideally spell it out in a plain English too, so it's not so confusing for people. So 2/3 and then 2/3, right? So what does that mean? It's 2/3 for quorum, right? So we got to have five people for quorum.
Yep.
Is that how we define quorum in the ordinance? We specify quorum as 5 of the zoning board? Of the Board of Adjustment?
So that is the concurring, okay, so for the membership, and this is the same for the Board of Adjustment, 7 members and 2 alternates. Where are those? And then
majority.
Number B.
Isn't it a majority unless we have different rules? The common rules is that
here it is.
The majority of the members is a quorum.
We have in the ordinance here, we have that at least 2/3 of the board members shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business.
So if we have a 5-member, we have to have 5 members to act.
Yep.
Yes.
And then if you have 2/3 of the present and voting members, you have to have 4 out of 5.
So statutorily on variances, you have to have 5. And then the question becomes, and this is, before we get into the 2/3 rule, I want to have a conversation just on whether or not conditional uses should be required a supermajority, regardless of the number of people that are there, whether it's the 5-person or not. I mean, I've talked about this before in the past. back in the 70s, when most of the communities were adopting zoning regulations, the state law didn't have a term called conditional uses. All they had was something that was called a variance or a special exception. And so if you think about it, a special exception is kind of like a variance because we're giving you special exception to do this specific use in a specific zoning regulation. And by doing that, that's why you needed to have that supermajority. The nomenclature of special exception does not exist in statute anymore. Everything has been switched over to what's commonly used by planners as conditional uses. And the basis of a conditional use has evolved into a use that is generally acceptable within a specific zoning district. However, you may attach conditions to mitigate its impact on the proposed adjoining land uses. And so based upon that, what you're seeing is that most entities across the nation are treating conditional uses as more of a quasi rezoning for all practical purposes. And to rezone property, all we need is a simple majority of the quorum established, right? And so this is even being changed at the state level here in the state of South Dakota on the county. Last year, Senate Bill 157 changed the language to state that it is a simple majority, 51%, it's just simple majority of those present and voting. And based upon my professional experience for the last 20 years, having a hand in nearly every enabling legislation law that's been adopted in the state, I'm going to guess that within 1 to 2 years, there will be a companion piece for municipalities that will go to the same 51% standard, because we like to have enabling legislation that's for communities and counties mirror one another. And so, in my opinion, I think we would be premature to go to 2/3 as the level when we're seeing more than likely there will be a change in state law mandating that you go to 51%. And so my recommendation would be to not have a 2/3 vote of those present and voting, but make it a 51% of those present and voting. And if we have to have 5 people there, then, what you're doing with a conditional use, it's a 3-vote requirement. And there would be 5 votes for a variance, because the variance is a bending or a relaxation of the rule. And when the conditional use permit is basically, we're saying we've identified this litany of uses that we think are okay in this specific zoning district. The only reason we're having a conditional use hearing is to get information from the public on how we can best mitigate those types of uses in the specific zoning district. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I'm in support of getting it to of those present and voting, because I think that follows my opinion of what state law is. My only issue with the ordinance as proposed is I think 2/3 is excessive, and I'd like to see that at 51%. I'll be quiet.
Mr. Roby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My good-natured ribbing of Todd aside, more of a theoretical question about whether or not we can have something different than present voting. So if the board wants to do that, that's your prerogative to recommend. I would, though, take a little bit of an issue from a legal perspective, but again, it's just my opinion. The board can take whatever course it would like, but there was a case some time ago. It was a federal case, but it involved a city. It involved a South Dakota city, and essentially the court ruled that boards can't act without a majority affirmative vote. And so if you were to reduce, if you now reduce it to present and voting, and then 51% of those present and voting, that's less than a majority. So 3 out of 5, 3 out of ultimately 7 could approve something. And a court interpreted a state statute that talks about a majority of the board having the authority to act as meaning a required majority affirmative vote, not just a majority to constitute the quorum. So that's not really what's in front of you, I guess, today, unless you wanted to propose some tweaks to the language. But I would recommend against having any action of the board be approved by less than a majority of the entire board.
Thank you, Mr. Roby. So effectively, Brandy, what the 2/3 and 2/3 would result in would be that we need 4 affirmative votes to proceed.
Right.
And so I'm just going to jump in, and I'm not arguing with Matt. I think how we have handled that specific rule, because statutorily in 157 on the county side, it talks about present and voting for conditional uses by the Board of Adjustment, but then it also talks about other actions being done by a majority of the board. So in that situation, there's a little bit of a conflict. So how we have handled it is that we basically established, maybe what we end up doing is that you establish the quorum instead of 5, you establish the quorum to be 6. So that way, if you have a simple majority of those present and voting, there will always be 4 votes. And so that way you're always going to have a majority of the board.
Yeah, that would work too. Yep. That would solve that problem, the concern that I would have. But again, just
Yeah, I agree with you, because I have that concern on the enabling legislation on the county side right now, and that's how I approach that on a professional basis with county governments.
So how does that work, Todd, if we have 6 members and we have 3 that say no and 3 that say yes?
He said motion fails. You read his lips.
Sorry, motion fails.
I don't think we should make our quorum 6 people just because we've had a few meetings in the past where we've only had 5, and I'd hate to not have a quorum just because we only have 5 instead of 6.
And that's where Matt.
I don't think you can't go 7, because you can't make the quorum the maximum number of the board members, because there will be times when we have either conflicts of interest, or somebody is sick, or somebody's on vacation, and we can't field a 7-person board. That happens all the time.
And that's, Matt and I had discussion of that, where either we make our members, the membership of the board more, or we have more alternates. Just so you are, because the thing about it is it's a volunteer board. So, and then it makes it a gamble a little bit for the applicants too, of, who shows up and is here for the quorum, but then it just makes the odds lesser. Well, not really, but.
Matt, do you know off the top of your head? I know on the county side of the equation, statutorily, you're only allowed 2 alternates to the Board of Adjustment, and I can't remember if that's mirrored in municipal section or not.
I haven't seen any language to that effect. I thought it was up to us, so I will. I'll double check and see what I can find on that.
I know that's what it says on the municipal side of it.
If we kept the quorum at 2/3 and just went with the majority of the total board membership, though, so you're still at 4 affirmative is required to move something forward. Is that not effectively the same thing?
That's the same as 2/3 then, it'd be 4 out of 5, or, whether it's majority or 2/3 if that's the case.
I think where it gets, so with having a quorum be 5, and then if you have the 2 already absent, then you need 4 of the 5. And so that's how we do it today. Now with this, the present and voting, so then does that change anything if there's 5?
Yeah, it does, because present and voting, if I only have 5 members there and a 5 is the established quorum, 3 votes approved, but then it brings up the concern that Matt has, that we don't have a majority of the board as a total, correct?
Again, it's not a imminent concern, especially as it relates to conditional uses. To your previous point about the status of conditional uses, but I just wanted to make sure that was considered.
If we went with a quorum of 6, and the only time that would cause a problem is if we only have 6 people there and it's a 3-3 vote, then it dies. And I think the chances of that happening would be very rare.
But 2 meetings ago, we only had 5 people, And if our quorum was 6, we would have just not had the meeting. But we were able to still have the meeting because quorum currently is only 5, and we were able to still act. If we change it to 6, there might be meetings where we're not able to have.
Well, then if we have the problem, if it becomes a problem and we have people repetitively missing the meetings, then we need new people on the board. We meet twice a month right now, and so basically the worst case situation that would happen would be 2 weeks.
But if you've got a quorum of 6, so you've got 6 in attendance, you still need 4 votes to proceed.
Right, and that's I think that's what I'm saying is I think 4 votes is enough. I don't necessarily think that you need 5 votes or a supermajority of the board to pass a conditional use, because a conditional use is not a special exception. It's a use commonly agreed to that it can be allowed in this district.
Right. But if it was defined as a majority of the board members, not of the board that's present and voting, is that not still 4 votes?
But statutorily, it says that except as to a conditional use, it's 2/3 of those present and voting. I mean, excuse me, it's just the members present and voting. The use shall be determined by an affirmative vote of the present and voting members of the Board of Adjustment at a percentage specifically set forth in the zoning ordinance. And what I'm trying to get to is I'm getting to the point where 4 votes can pass a conditional use.
Yeah.
To the chairman's point, can our percentage be based on the entire membership of the board?
That's what I'm wondering. But it sounds like in the statute it has to be defined differently, right?
I would.
Or can we define it as the statute, regardless of? I mean, whoever's present and voting is present and voting, but you're still looking at the decision based on the total membership of the board, right?
But if I'm present, if we're present and voting, if we're all in agreement that it's on present and voting, that's how many people are there, and we all in agreement that we need 4 votes to pass a simple majority of the full board. We then need to come up with a way to either make that a quorum issue, and if you have a quorum issue of 6, then you're guaranteed that you have to have 4 votes. And the only problem that causes in the event that there's only 6 people there and the issue is contested and becomes a 3-3 split.
Yeah, it seems to me, if I could chime in on that component, I would tend to agree with Commissioner Brink on the concerns of adjusting the quorum. I think, while it does provide a solution for this issue, it may create other issues down the road. The examples of the numerous meetings that we only have 5 members present in the past, not only the recent past, but just our past tenure, that happens quite frequently. And it obviously that's the biggest impact. And there may be some other unintended consequences to that change in the quorum as well that maybe we're not even thinking of tonight. But the obvious one being is we could end up with a good number of meetings get canceled, which I don't think anybody would be in favor of as a result of this.
Let me ask the question, could staff go back and take a look at how many times in the last year we only had 5 members at the board of the Board of Adjustment? I don't care about the Planning Commission because that's a simple majority, that's only 4. But the number of times we only had 5 members present for a Board of Adjustment action in the last year. I personally think we shouldn't meet as a Board of Adjustment with less than 6 members because I might be a really nice guy, but I'm sure I've aggravated one of the 6 people that might be sitting, on that board. And so I always think because anytime you're asking for a unanimous decision of anything, that's difficult to attain. So to me, 6 persons on a Board of Adjustment for either a variance or a conditional use should be the minimum quorum if we have a 7-member board. So that gives at least an out for somebody that maybe doesn't want to go along with the flow or what have you, or at least I don't have to get everybody showing up that day. Now, granted, the applicant can always withdraw his application and come back again. But if you wanted
Yeah.
to do it consistently, I think six for a quorum can easily be argued at the Board of Adjustment. Our planning commission is going to be a simple majority of the board member, which would be 4.
But isn't,
Well, that'd be a point of clarity too. Would we just be amending what the quorum is for the BOA when acting on conditional uses? And then, so we could have a separate, we'd have different quorums for different meetings or actions?
The quorum would be 6, acting as the Board of Adjustment. The only thing we do on the Board of Adjustment is we hear appeals of the decision. It's a variance or it's a conditional use. And so we have to have 6 members of the board to handle a Board of Adjustment action. If I have a plat or a preliminary plan, that's a planning commission, which is not established by a supermajority on that quorum. All we need there is just a simple majority of the board, which would be 4 members. But right now we have 2 different standards in the ordinance. We have 4 for the planning commission and we have a 5-member Board of Adjustment. I'm suggesting that if we went to 6 on the Board of Adjustment quorum standard, you're going to have at least 5 votes with 1 possible no on a variance, and you can still move a thing forward. But if we're on a conditional use and the quorum is 6, you're going to have 4 votes, which is a simple majority to issue a conditional use permit.
Yeah, I don't think I'm opposed to changing the quorum number. I'd certainly rather have, more people here participating. I do share some of the concerns about, that Jeff mentioned about having some short nights where we have had only, 5 people. But that's kind of on us too, right? To make sure that we're here and present and that we have a voting membership.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if we're in the public hearing format for portion yet, if we've just been all board discussion.
I did open the public hearing.
So, just to clarify, currently, if we have 5 members here, does it take 4 or 5 votes to pass a conditional use?
right now it's 2/3, so you need 4.
So right now, we have a quorum of 5, we need 4 people to vote. So I mean, that's, the only thing we would be changing would be.
Hold on. Right now, you need all 5.
Okay, yes, you need 4.66.
5 people, you need all 5.
Yes.
The proposed language in the resolution would change that to 4 if there's 5 people present, correct?
Yes.
Because it's 2/3 of 2/3.
Correct.
It's basically a 1 vote difference from what we have today. So you would go from, needing approval of all 5 votes, which is the case today, to being able to have a 4-to-1 vote and have that be constitute approval.
I guess what's the problem with some items failing? I mean, if we're going to pass everything, then let's just put the rubber stamp out and pass everything and not take a vote at all. So there's never a problem when something doesn't pass. I mean, that's just opinions. So
it's not so much a rubber stamp. I mean, it's how you view a conditional use. If you feel a conditional use is where I need to ask pretty please, then it's more of a special exception, and then you need the supermajority, and I'm completely fine with that. But if we're trying to look at a list of uses that we've all agreed to that these fit in a specific zoning or regulation, as long as they meet the appropriate setbacks, and if we need to sit down and have a community meeting to talk about what kinds of things can help mitigate those things, either through screening or lighting or open space requirements, then they should be a pass-through.
Yeah, I agree. And so in that case, with the conditional use, the intention would be to try to align with the planning commission, right? So the planning commission is a majority vote in the case of a zoning action, right?
Right.
But, thinking back to my tenure on the Plan Commission and Board of Adjustment, I can only think of a couple of conditional uses that have ever failed, and yes, if we had more members, they might have passed, but, are conditional uses failing really a problem that we have right now?
No.
Are we solving a problem with trying to change this ordinance?
Well, I think the only reason why is just to have the present and voting consistent with the state statute and for the
Yeah.
conditional uses. But I don't think that we should really get into the quorum, changing the quorum or any of that, because right now it's all consistent. So the Board of Adjustment is the membership is hinged off of the Plan Commission. So I think just what we're proposing is just like Stacy said, it's a matter of one vote difference for conditional uses to be allowed to have 4, where variances would still be 5.
While still requiring a simple majority of the entire board at 4.
Right.
If we have a full board membership, which we want to have, which is 7 members, and if all 7 of us show up, which we should show up as much as we can, or have an alternate take our place, what we're saying is that if we leave it as proposed, I need 5 votes to pass the conditional use, which is a supermajority.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, and if I'm the only one that believes this, then tell Todd to shut up. But I don't think we need a majority to
I'm with
pass
you,
this.
Todd, and I want to I want to be able to get the language to that point. I'm not sure how it gets there.
So here's how it could get there. It could get there by just disregarding what I said, because it's kind of theoretical. Because right now, 3 out of 4 people can pass items on the Plan Commission, and so that's less than 7. That's less than half of 7. And so you could just take the chance that my theories will never come to pass, and then just say that 50% of those present and voting, 51% of those present and voting is enough to pass a conditional use. And if we ever get 3 to pass a conditional use and it's challenged, then I guess we'll find out what happens.
I mean, we've hard coded the number of, membership. Can we not just state that we need 4 votes for conditional use?
That was just going there in my mind, Mr. Chairman, or you could state this, if only a quorum is present, that requires 4 votes to pass.
But then that's contrary to what the statutory requirement is, says that it's for those present and voting. And so, in my opinion, I think if we just say.
But you're still referencing the number present and voting by saying if there is only a quorum present.
Well, the quorum has to be 5.
Yeah.
And if we say that, if we're saying that it's the affirmative vote of 51% of the present voting, which is a quorum, which is 5, 3 votes pass a conditional use permit. And if we're fine with that, then we need to get people to come to meetings. If people have a problem with that. If a conditional use permit passes with 3 votes because we couldn't fill a full board, well, then that's where the city council needs to decide who needs to be sitting on the board, I guess.
With the concern about changing the language there, Todd, would be, what point Mr. Roby raised.
But he's acquiesced since that.
Yeah.
White flag. It's my white flag.
I agree with the general principle, Todd, that, the conditional use should be treated in the same way that we do the zoning, and it should be a majority.
And if we want to make sure that we have 4 votes, the only way that you can do that is by changing the quorum, the members of the quorum requiring 6. So that way, there will be 4 votes for a CUP. What that does is it just means we got to have butts in the seats when we have our meetings.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been that many occasions in the little over 2 odd years I've been on the board where there's only 5 of us here. And if there's an opportunity that we need 3 or 4 alternates, then maybe that's how we need to approach that.
I'm not opposed.
I would like to make a motion if you're ready to move, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I'll close the public hearing.
I'd like to make a motion to state that the language should say, notwithstanding the foregoing, conditional uses shall be determined by an affirmative vote at least 51% of the present and voting members of the board. I'd also direct staff to go to the appropriate section that talks about the Board of Adjustment quorum and changing the quorum numbers from 5 to 6. That would be on left 210202B. As opposed to saying at least 2/3 of the board members shall constitute a quorum. The board member, 6, however, it needs to say 6 members present shall constitute a quorum. Matt could pretty that language up.
Mr. Chair, just to that point of the quorum, from staff perspective, I don't know if I would advise that we want different quorums for the two boards. That'd be my main concern there.
You've got them already. You got a quorum of 5 for the Board of Adjustment, and a quorum of 4 for the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission stays at 4. I'm recommending that we could take the Board of Adjustments from 5 to 6. We have to have more people for the BOA than we do for the Planning Commission right now currently.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Any member of the board that would second? I'll ask one more time. Do we have a second? No second. Do we have an alternative motion?
I'll make an alternative motion, Mr. Chair. Notwithstanding the foregoing conditional uses shall be determined by affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of the present and voting members of the board. So if we have a 5-member board, 4 members would end up being it. If we have 6, then it's 4. If we have 7, it's 5.
I'll second
that's as
that
presented.
motion.
As presented. I think it's just most importantly that we have language that is consistent with the present voting standard and statute.
Okay. So we have a motion to proceed with the resolution as presented.
I'll second that motion.
A second. Any additional discussion before we take a vote? All right, roll call.
Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Kays.
No.
Ford.
Yes.
Spire.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1.
Election.
All right. Onto the highlight of the evening, huh?
Very compelling discussion.
So, agenda item 6E is election.
Okay, so this is we're going to do for the chairman and vice chairman. Yeah. If anyone has a nomination for chairman.
I move Commissioner Dolly to continue as chairman of the board.
I'll second that.
It doesn't have to be me. I'm just saying.
But you do such a good job.
Hear the train coming.
All right, is there any additional nominations? Otherwise, Is your mic on?
No, it's not. I'm sorry. I thought Blake wanted to step
I
down.
can't quite
Okay,
hear
I know.
Rhonda.
I didn't have my mic on. I'm sorry, Blake. I thought you wanted to step down for, yeah, but I mean, I'm happy to keep you where you are. I thought that's why we were where we were at, so I'm just confused.
Yes, I mean, that was my intention to continue on the board, to step down from the chairman role because of my commitment to travel. As the COVID scenario has arisen, I've had no opportunity to travel these days, and we've made this remote Teams thing work. So I'm okay with continuing if the board would like to keep me in this role. That said, I have no problem with anybody else wanting to run the show either.
Okay, perfect. No, you're doing just fine.
Okay. Now, if there's no additional nomination, do we want a roll call vote or just a unanimous?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a substitute motion to cast a unanimous ballot as presented. Therefore, we wouldn't need a roll call vote. Cease nominations and move on unanimous ballot.
I'm not sure of the procedural response to that.
You need to know the procedures as the chairman. Come on now.
That was a substitute motion made by the original motion maker, so I think that it would just need a second, and then we just proceed to vote on this. It would take the place of the original motion.
I'll make that second.
And that's just a voice vote?
So then all voting in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was more of a question, but I'm glad. All right.
You need, to
Yes.
ask, you need to ask for those opposed.
Oh, all those opposed? None. Okay. All right. Congratulations, Blake. And
Appreciate
now
the vote of confidence.
Now we'll move on to if there's a nomination for vice chairman. And so this is because Mark Stein retired and stepped down from the board. So this is currently vacant. So looking for nominations.
I would like to nominate Jeff Brink.
I'll second.
For vice
Board
chair.
seconds.
All right. Okay. Any other nominations? Sorry, I don't know how to run the voting part of it.
Ask 3 times. Ask 3 times.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Hearing none.
Congratulations, Mr. Brink.
Jeff went from alternate to vice chairman. He's making moves.
He
Yeah.
skipped a few steps
Less than
in
a
there.
week.
Excelling.
Rod in a ringer.
All right, congratulations, Jeff.
And then, Brandy, I think the other thing that we talked about was to get that in the calendar to do on a regular basis as well, so that it's a scheduled time during the year.
Yes. Yep, I have added that, so we keep that going. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, then moving on to the next item on the agenda is 6F, which is a presentation on ex parte communication.
Yes, just what you guys want is a presentation. So Matt is going to lead this discussion, and I think he was going to keep it to a half hour.
I really need to use the restroom, so I've been heavily editing this as we've been sitting here. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks, Brandy. It's my understanding there was some questions recently about maybe some ex parte communications and maybe some conflicts of interest issues, and so we thought it'd be pertinent to bring it back and just kind of do a little refresher here. I'm not Luke Muller or Todd Kays, so I apologize for that. There is attached to this agenda item, there's a presentation that was put together by Luke and Todd and presented to, I believe, the South Dakota Municipal League Planners Conference in 2018. And then there's also a kind of a white paper of sorts that was presented by Jack Heave and Zach Peterson at the Planners Conference in 2019, I believe. And so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. There's information there on the quasi-judicial hearings, the natures of conflicts of interest, ex parte communications, and how to handle certain situations. And so I'm not going to touch on everything. I'm just going to focus real quick on ex parte communications in the context of quasi-judicial hearings and conflicts of interest. And so I would gladly take interruptions if anybody wanted to chime in. I'm looking at you, Todd. But anyway, so quasi-judicial, I'll just briefly just kind of touch on this as a refresher what that means. Quasi-judicial is essentially when you're taking policies that are expressed by existing ordinances, statutes, regulations, and you're applying those policies to past or present facts and making a decision. So like a judge does. So that's why it's called a quasi-judicial, because you're not actually judges, but you're acting essentially as a judge. So as it relates to you folks, all of your actions, as we have it arranged right now, that are taken as the Board of Adjustment, are taken in a quasi-judicial, I will get that right, context. So conditional uses, variances, and administrative appeals would be considered quasi-judicial. As you sit as the Plan Commission, all those actions, as we sit today under South Dakota law, are considered legislative. So zoning, or rezoning, annexing, ordinance revisions, et cetera, are legislative. So they're prospective. They affect things going forward. They don't affect current rights as applied to current policies. They're in effect changing policies, legislative. So first, I'm just going to touch on conflicts generally, and then I'll go back to ex parte communication. So on conflicts, there's basically one bright line rule, and that's if you have a direct pecuniary, in other words, financial interest in the action in front of you, you must recuse yourself. Other than that, and that's whether that's a legislative or quasi-judicial setting, either one, you must recuse yourself under a recently enacted South Dakota law. Now, there are some grayer areas that have been spelled out by some recent case law as well. And those include times when you may have an indirect financial interest, such as if you're an employee of an applicant, direct personal interest, which is non-financial, but it might be a blood relative or a close friend, or indirect personal interest, which is also non-financial. It might be a nonprofit that you're a member of, an organization on which you for which you sit on the board or something like that. So those are the kind of the grayer areas. And in the quasi-judicial settings and those actions that are in front of you as you sit as the Board of Adjustment, you have to be cognizant of all four of those categories. So obviously on the first one I mentioned, automatic recusal. On the second three that I mentioned, you have to be cognizant of that. And if an applicant is before you that you believe might touch on one of those areas, you do need to be sure to make that known at the hearing. And so again, that's only in that quasi-judicial setting. You need to make sure that's made known at the hearing. Now, when you disclose that, you can recuse yourself if you don't believe you can be impartial. So if, let's say you have an indirect personal interest, which is the least, which is kind of the lowest rung, of those four. Let's say you're a member of the Elks and the Elks is applying for something, but not only are you just a paying member that doesn't participate, you happen to be, the head honcho, or you high up in the organization, and you take a pretty significant interest in the outcome of an application. So you might just recuse yourself and acknowledge that, hey, I can't be impartial here, even though I don't benefit financially or anything like that. You may also volunteer to recuse yourself if you believe that the appearance of impropriety, even though you in your heart or you in your mind don't believe it's going to affect your decision making, you just acknowledge that the appearance could be that it's just going to make more sense for you to recuse yourself. Of course, you may also be voluntold that by yours truly if I believe that something rises to the level that you probably need to recuse yourself. But, you know, absent those two things, if you feel you can be impartial, you've made the declaration, and neither myself as the city attorney, the applicant, or the public raises a concern, you can go ahead and vote on the issue. Now, there's frankly, it's a little bit in flux right now after the Supreme Court case came down, the legislation that was passed afterwards. So it truly is a case-by-case, fact-specific inquiry. And so if you ever have any questions about whether or not you might have a conflict, just let me know, and I can be happy to throw a dart and take a guess. But yeah.
Question.
Matt, I was going to ask a question though too. If Blake decides to say that, you know, I'm in Kiwanis and we need to do something for the pancake feed or something, and we need a zoning permit for it, and it, you know, he can say that. I don't think it's going to sway me. 2/3 of the board can still vote him off from that as well, right?
Yeah, that was going to be my last point here. I probably skipped over. I do have some notes I'm looking at. You're right. Yeah. So the other piece of that language in the statute is that if you either have a direct financial interest and you have to recuse yourself, or one of those other scenarios where you are too close to the issue, so you recuse yourself, or I tell you need to recuse, all those fail. But the board, your fellow board members say, you know what, even though you can be impartial, we really don't think you can. A motion could be made, and 2/3 of the board could move to force you to recuse yourself from the issue. That's correct. Blake, were you going to ask something as well?
Yeah, so you'd mentioned, you know, disclosing, and then if the applicant or yourself or a member of the public had issue with it, that you could recuse yourself. So is that an appropriate question that, you know, after disclosing, you know, the potential conflict of interest and saying that you don't think it's going to sway you, that you would open it up for anybody that has concerns?
Correct. In fact, that was kind of one of the points I was going to touch on at the end here, make a suggestion as we're talking about some of these nuts and bolts logistics items, voting and that sort of thing. One thing the board could consider, both the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment, frankly, is there could be an agenda item added as a matter of course, where the chair just asks anybody if they have anything they need to disclose in relation to conflicts or ex parte communications, et cetera, on anything that's on the agenda. So you could actually just make it an agenda item, and then folks could just make those disclosures at that time. Otherwise, as each item comes up, people just need to take it upon themselves to make sure they say something. But having that reminder on the agenda, I think, is something many communities do, and I would recommend it.
I do believe that we have that as a formal agenda item on the county.
Yeah, we do that. We do that on the county joint zoning board and the county commission as well, and the county board of adjustment. And I just think too, it also, as a board member, if I see that it's on the agenda, I know I'm going to have to say something anyway. So at least then I can at least talk to staff beforehand and say, you know what, I think I'm not going to be able to participate. Make sure that there's somebody there to hold my seat.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
would you guys on the conflict issue? Thought I heard somebody.
So that was Brandy that was chiming in. Do you guys want something like that added on our agendas then?
Yeah, I think it would be fine to include. It's certainly good to, you know, prompt that and to be thinking about it on a regular basis.
Okay. Sounds good. We can get that done.
This is Ford.
Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me. Not only do I think it prompts the board, I think it gives the public a feeling of confidence that we're being above board in all things. And it's right there in black and white. And you'll ask the question and there'll be an answer or there won't, but it'll be out in public nothing hidden. I think it's just another confidence boosting thing that the board is doing everything above board.
Yep.
Any other comments? I'll just wrap up here with the ex parte communications if not. So on the ex parte communication, this really just applies to that quasi judicial setting. Essentially, just a quick definition, it's communication from one party to a board member without the other parties present. So as you sit as the Board of Adjustment, it could take the form of usually it's going to take the form of the applicant reaching out to a board member to try to sway them on some sort of issue or fill them in on some backstory or something like that. Of course, it could also go the other way. It could be board members being curious and trying to go look at the site and that sort of thing. So it's basically information that's exchanged that one board member might obtain outside of the presence of the rest of the board members and the public at large. And so in the context of quasi-judicial actions, ex parte communication is prohibited. It shouldn't occur. Now, if it does occur, sometimes it can be, again, it can take the form of applicant initiated or it can be board member initiated. If it's applicant initiated or if somebody else, if you as a board member are contacted by somebody and you didn't invite the contact, you got an email, you got a letter, that sort of thing, you regardless need to disclose it at the next meeting. But if you got a letter, you read it, you disclose it at the meeting, you didn't invite the contact, as long as you can acknowledge to yourself and to the rest of the board that occurred and that you don't believe it swayed your decision making, you can proceed with the action. But if you engage in if you initiate the interaction, typically the recommendation is that you do recuse yourself. And so it's just a kind of an admonishment here this is a reminder to if there's an action in front of the Board of Adjustment, as much as you might want to call somebody ahead of time and get some additional info, it's just not the recommended course of action. You need to wait to have that discussion in public, to allow the potential opponent to have the opportunity to comment on it, that sort of thing. But if you do obtain information, it just needs to be disclosed, and as long as you can acknowledge that you don't believe you're going to be swayed or anything like that in your decision making, you can proceed with considering the petition in front of you. Now, just as a reminder again, ex parte communication only applies to quasi-judicial actions. So if a matter is legislative, prospective, there really is no technical issue with that sort of thing. So think of lobbyists, think of reaching out to your legislators to try to encourage them to vote yay or nay on some issue, as long as it's a prospective action. Now, in South Dakota, zonings, rezonings, that sort of thing, the Supreme Court has made note in a case that those are legislative actions, and generally they are, of course. But other states, there has been some movement towards potentially considering a rezone that only affects one person, for example, or has a significant effect on one or a group of people, much more so than the general public, considering that legislative quasi-judicial in nature. But so far in South Dakota, the clean line for us is that DOA actions are quasi-judicial and Plan Commission actions are legislative. And so at the end of the day, though, even on those legislative actions, if you learn a whole slew of information outside of the board meeting, I think it's the best practice to bring it forward so the board can benefit from that information and the general public can have that information as well. So any questions on that ex parte communication issue?
I do.
The only thing I would add, Matt, to that is that the big thing, there's been several court cases about, zoning, planning and zoning board members going out and doing their own investigations. And and driving by a property to see, just to get a feel for where that property looks like is not a big deal. Even stopping to take a picture is not a big deal. If you find yourself getting out, starting walking up onto the property, knocking on the door, having a conversation with somebody, those are the things that you have to be cognizant about, that we should just try to avoid. We're fortunate enough here in Watertown that we have a paid staff that goes out and does all that research for us. So when we're getting it, we're getting that staff report, we're getting that information. That way we're coming into this with eyes wide open to all sort of issues and ideas, and that we're not predisposed to any sort of preliminary judgment. And so, not taking any credit, Luke and I worked on some of these things that we had presented before. And I think there's just some good best management practices if you want to read through some of the handout. And I'd be more than glad to answer any questions too, in addition to Matt.
Okay, I have a question. This is Bonnie. Now, like for the Board of Adjustments and stuff, when we're talking about like a garage that they want to have close to the lot line and stuff, we still will be able to drive by and look at it from the street, correct?
Yes, site visits are completely okay. Individual site visits, walking by, driving by, snapping a picture, that type of thing is completely okay. I think you could run into a potential problem if you end up talking with the applicant, or if the applicant comes out and wants to talk to you. And I think it's okay as board members to say, let's have this conversation at the public meeting, because if this continues to go on, and politely tell them that you'll have to recuse yourself, and then that becomes a no vote.
That was my next question, because it is pretty amazing how often you get a phone call. Just wanted to bring it to your attention, and now we can say, I drove by, I looked at it, and we'll talk about it at the meeting.
That's correct.
And,
Yes,
and it's
I
not
think
even
that's good.
it's not even just the applicants either. It could be opponents to the issue, right?
Exactly.
That also constitutes ex parte communication. So
Generally,
really anything.
The other thing I've learned is if somebody does call, directing them back to the meeting, letting them know that if, the conversation goes too far, that you will indeed have to recuse yourself, which could then, make it more difficult for them to get what they're seeking, or vice versa, that type of thing. The other point I guess I was gonna chime in on is, it's okay to have a summary of the conversation too, and sometimes that keeps people safe, is just disclosing that at the meeting. I had this letter sent to me. You could send that to staff. Staff could forward that to the entire board. If you don't have time for that, you could bring the letter in, give it to the chairperson, and it could be read as part of the record, that type of thing. So sharing those communications it is always a good idea to increase the transparency.
I always tell people professionally, and even sitting on this board, is that if somebody calls you, you just tell them to go to the meeting. Or if they want to give you something, just give it to staff. I'll talk about the weather. I'll talk about the sports. I'll talk about your wife. I'll talk about your girlfriend. It doesn't really matter. But I'm not going to talk to you about what's on the agenda that night. And basically, I tell people, if you have a complaint or you have an issue or you're the applicant, just show up that night, because you can tell your story a heck of a lot better than I could, and I don't need to know your story ahead of time.
That's a great point, Commissioner Case. That's the safest thing to do, is direct everything back to the meeting.
I got a question. So scenario is somebody's asking you about a previous decision that's already been acted on. What were the details? Why was the decision made? Why did the board act in the way that they did? That's acceptable conversation to have.
Depends on if it's if it's an attorney that's representing somebody that wants to sue you. I'm sorry, I'm being facetious.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, you got to be careful about those types of interactions. But generally, I mean, it was at a public meeting, unless there was some reason to go into executive session prior to taking an action. Anything that would have been said in that executive session would certainly be confidential. But anything that was acted upon in the open happened at a public meeting. Hopefully, going back to one of the other issues that's in those slides is, putting together a factual basis for decisions that are made. Hopefully, everything comes out. That's the goal, is for have everything come out prior to decisions being made, whether that's approval or denial. And so, in theory, if they're asking you a question 2 weeks from now, why'd you make a decision? It should have been already said publicly. But, again, if it was acted upon in public and you think of another reason why you, to add to your reasoning for making the decision, it's probably no harm, no foul, as long as it's not potential plaintiff's attorney.
Now, if they turn around and say, because I'm intending to bring an application in front of you for a similar deal, at that point in time, you would say, hey, I don't want to hear anything more. It's got to be in the public hearing.
Right. I mean, even if they're just asking how an action went, I mean, really, you could direct them to a video online or the minutes. You could explain exactly what happened at the meeting, but yeah, once they get into those prospective questions, that's the other kind of challenging part is, somebody plans to bring a variance request a year from now. They haven't submitted an application. I mean, the safest bet is if you've somehow learned that they're acknowledging it or they're thinking about doing it, you should treat it as if they've already submitted an application. Of course, the brightest line is when there's an application in, of course, but if they don't tell you, if somebody comes and asks you how a decision went, they don't tell you, and you tell them how it went, I mean, and they submit an application a week later, it just kind of, it is what it is. All you've done is told them how a decision went. But again, if you get any sort of hint that they're thinking about doing something similar, and they start asking you how you're going to think about something, I would recommend just telling them to submit the application and go through the process, come to the meeting.
This is Ford. I've been in a position like that several times, and I have found personally that I have just discovered it's easiest and best for the board, I think, to simply say there's a video record online and the minutes are available. That's how the decision was chosen. And then you're not trying to explain, or you never know what's going to come out of your mouth. At least I don't all the time. And those words are out there and you can't take them back. And then they'll hold you accountable for that at the meeting. Just refer to the documentation, which is available as a public record, and let them figure it out for themselves why a decision was made.
One thing I just want to point out and compliment this board on, it seems to me in my few short meetings here that you all do a pretty good job of putting out there on the record, especially if you're going to vote no on something or why you support something. And I believe that that is very important, because then that can be captured in the minutes, it's captured on the video, and then that way it's more of a due process in terms of an applicant, needs to know why you voted the way you did, and maybe not every time in every single case, but I think this board does a good job with that, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, and some of it comes, obviously we should make a habit of it, of doing those factual bases and being super cautious with ex parte communications and that sort of thing. But obviously you should be on heightened alert if it's pretty obvious that it's going to be a contentious issue. Mm-hmm. And so again, we should make a habit of all these good practices, but if it's going to be a contentious issue, that, just be on heightened alert.
And feel free to
points.
communicate with staff on it if there's a situation and you're not sure about, or, if somebody did call you or you're getting a number of calls and things like that. I think it's always best just to identify that with staff. If we don't know, we'll bring in Matt for his interpretation. And I think it's always best just to err on the side of caution in these things, because lawsuits can take up a significant amount of time and money and effort and things like that. So just always err on the side of caution, and we'll try to direct you as staff as best we can to avoid any potential issues.
So that raises a good question, Stacy. If we want to do that, how and who?
Certainly.
We email, do we call? Who do we approach?
Sure. You can approach any one of us as staff. You could definitely call myself. You could call Brandy, she's involved in a lot of this as well. Heath, Director Von, he would also be an appropriate person to contact, or you could reach out directly to the city attorney. But we'd like to filter some of it through the staff if possible. I think that would be, then we'll be aware of the situation come time for the meeting as well. So we can act as a team to help facilitate any questions that you may have.
And if you're being contacted by a specific person too, and they have questions that they want to get into the details, that's where you can direct them to call staff as well.
Great point.
Yeah, and as far as the who to call part, I would say if it's a board member and you guys have concerns or questions you want to run through staff, I would start with Stacy if she's available. But then of course any other staff member like Brandy or myself would be available as well. But as a community development manager, I think it'd be appropriate to channel those through her and start the conversation there. Just to ask clarity for you as a board.
Let me just add one more little bit of nugget based upon all the times I've been deposed over the years. One thing that we didn't talk a little bit about, it's not only the applicant or it's the general public. We as board members should avoid any sort of ex parte contacts between ourselves, talking about an issue before the meeting, after we get a staff report, having phone calls, because now we're bordering getting into the whole collusion issue and whether or not there can be a fair hearing if we're already predisposed. And I call up Bonnie and say, what do you think about this? We need to be avoiding that. Legislatively, I agree. I think with Matt, we could probably have those kinds of conversations and build coalitions and those types of things if we want to try to legislatively put something through. But if it's a Board of Adjustment action, we need to be avoiding talking to each other as well prior to the meeting.
Yeah, outside of the public hearing, absolutely ask those questions. What do you think of this in the public context? And we should all be, chipping in and saying what we think, right?
Right.
It's a good thing none of you guys don't like each other anyway, so.
Yeah. And if there ever is a need, I can't think of a specific example, but if there is a need to go out and do a site visit as a group, contact staff. We will set that up, make sure that we're advertising, that we're doing all the appropriate steps. If there is a need to go and have a site visit, where there's more than a quorum present, that type of thing. So yeah, we can set that up and make that happen if there is a specific need to do a site visit.
Yeah. The other piece of that is, so if there's a desire for folks to get on the ground physically, you just have to notice the public meeting. But the other thing you could do is if somebody says, hey, so this is coming up on the agenda, I really would like a closer look at this particular piece of ground or whatever, we can always as staff go out and take some photos of it and upload it to the agenda as well. So.
Yep. Good.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate this. This is just a good refresher for me too.
Yeah, I like seeing it every time. So. Any additional questions from anybody? Thanks, Matt.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 7 on the agenda then is open public comments. There was nobody left there to speak,
Nobody's
right?
here, so.
Okay. Move on to new business.
None that I have.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
One quick item I'll mention for new business. I'll be presenting a rural street section design standard to the city council, likely at this next meeting on November 2nd. Where this fits in with the planning commission would be, I'll be circling back and talking with you guys as a board, as a planning commission, as to which zoning districts our rural street section should be applicable in. The technical components of what this rural street section should look like, I'm going to iron that out with the engineering staff, and we'll simply take a design standard amendment to the city council for approval in that regard. But then we'll step back and look at, what zoning districts this should be applied in. And that's where we'll have some some level of input from the planning commission on that component. So I just wanted to plant the seed, let you think about that. Essentially, a rural street section is one that, you know, like you see out in the rural areas, it doesn't have curb and gutter. It's got ditches and side slopes to it. It doesn't have conventional storm sewer inlets and storm sewer pipe and things of that nature. It will typically have culverts under the driveways, and a lot of times a lack of any sidewalk or pathway, depending on how we set this up as far as what's required within that typical section. We do have a couple of subdivisions that have recently proposed using rural street sections. So we're trying to just polish up our regulations in that regard and put some standards in the books that make it easy to administer what that section should look like at a minimum. And then secondly, where it should be considered within the city limits. It's rare that we would apply this section. It would be typically in like rural residential areas where you have larger lots of, you know, maybe a handful of acres or more. And sometimes they're in some industrial park scenarios. Communities will allow them there as well. We have our commercial lake district, which is where one of the current projects are that's proposing this use. You know, you look at South Lake Drive, North Lake Drive, of course, they're rural street sections. But then we also have a lot of urban street sections within and around the lake as well. So just food for thought. Wanted to plant the seed on that and let you know that'll be forthcoming.
Yeah, sounds great. Any other new business? Any old business?
None that I have.
One quick item there, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yep.
Staffing, want to give a quick update on that. And I'm sorry I can't get off the 2/3 item tonight, but essentially that's the number of staff we've been running with in community development for quite a while now. Is about 2/3 of our staff. Well, exactly 2/3 of them. We're still short 2 staff members out of the 6 that make up the community development division. Good news is we've got an offer that's been accepted for a permit technician. And I won't necessarily disclose who that is yet till I see the whites of their eyes in the office here, which is supposed to be next Monday. So we're looking forward to that. And we'll be introducing that employee to the board as the time is appropriate in the future when they have an opportunity to be at a meeting. But we're looking forward to bringing them on, helping with the minor permitting and some of the administrative duties as well. We still are having difficulties filling the building specialist position, and how that, as I've described, has been rewritten. You know, if that difficulty continues, we may have to go back to the drawing board on how we have that position set up and things of that nature. But as of now, we're getting by with our permitting with the staff that we have, and also with the consulting services that we're relying on through TSP. So
I appreciate the update on that. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any reason for executive session?
Not unless Heath has a reason.
No reasons there.
All right. With that, I'll adjourn us. I appreciate the time, everybody tonight. I know it was a long one, but thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate your time that you take out of your day to volunteer for the community. Much appreciated.